everybody, Sean here with Tab Performance. Today I just wanted to do a quick video on a close-up installation of our Z-rings with the torque cone inserts. So the first thing you are going to want to do is you're going to take out the tip. I have the muffler off the bike here. You don't need to do that. I just wanted to do it so we could get a really close-up look at what we're doing. So you're going to take out the two bolts holding in the tip. There's one on the inside, one on the bottom. Once you get those out, you can pull the tip out. This one comes out pretty easy. If you have a 4.5 inch, it may be a little bit more difficult. So spray some WD-40 in the little crack there between the tip and the muffler, and it should come right out for you. So take the tip out. Once you have the tip out, the next thing you're going to do is we're going to take our Z-ring with the torque cone. You can buy it with or without the torque cone. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to install that as well. Take your torque cone, put it right here, line up the bolts. Once you have that, you can take the 3 bolts that hold the torque cone to the Z-ring plate, add some Loctite. We're using red, it doesn't have to be red, you can use blue. Another thing too you want to be aware of is to put it on the bottom half of the threads, because sometimes what can happen is if you put it on the middle of the threads, you go to put that in there, where you put the Loctite's not even engaging where the threads thread into, so you want to make sure you put it on the bottom so the Loctite is actually doing something. Alright, once you got those snug down to where you know your Loctite is engaging into the threads, next we can take our tip. And what I like to do before I install the Z-ring into the tip is take a 1/4-20 tap, and this is going to be more important on a bike that's got quite a few miles on it, because what can happen is the top and outside bolt holes, they aren't covered by anything, so they can get filled with carbon and things like that, road grime. So what I like to do is just take a tap, run it through there, clean out everything to make sure just nothing gets caught when we put our set screws in, and then making sure just everything is clean, because what can happen sometimes if you go to put that set screw in, it can catch on something and it can strip out before it gets tightened down. I like to use a tap. What you can also do is run the bolts back through them a couple times just to make sure everything's cleaned out. Alright, once you get the threads all cleaned out, you're ready to go ahead and put in your Z-ring in the torque cone insert. So before I put that in there, I want to kind of show you how it goes in there. So we have set screw holes 90 degrees around the Z-ring, which line up with the bolt holes 90 degrees around the tip. So I'm going to use the Tab Performance logo as a reference to where I put the set screws. I'm working on the right hand side. Tab Performance logo is on top. The bolts holding the tip to the muffler go on the inside and the bottom, so I'm going to use the set screws on the outside and the top. So you're going to take your Z-ring, lining up the set screw hole with the bolt hole on the top, hold that in place. Once that is in place, I'm going to take my Loctite, put it on my set screw. I'm just gonna work this down in there, trying to make sure everything's lined up. And you'll know if it's not lined up or if anything gets off center, because when you go to put this thing in here, when it's fully seated, it should be flush with the surface of the tip, otherwise it won't go all the way in. It'll get caught when you try to put that in there. So mine went all the way in, so I know that one's in place. But you can tell by looking at this, just because that one's in place doesn't mean the whole thing's in place. So what you have to do is just kind of maneuver this to where your bolt holes are lined up. So if this thing ever gets off centered like this one, you can tell the holes aren't lined up. So what you can do is you can maneuver it with the torque cone, pulling it in place, using a pick to push these things into place. In worst case scenario, if it just gets lopsided in there and you have to back the set screw all the way out to get it, all you have to do is back that one out. That thing's in there pretty good, so all you have to do is take something soft like the opposite side of a hammer and just tap it out, and then you start over. So again, I'm just lining up that bolt hole. It's lined up. It's seated. Alright, now I got the top one in there. Now I'm just going to go around and make sure that my outside set screw hole is in position. Mine is. If it's not, you can use a pick to pry it into position, or use the torque cone. Mine's lined up, so I'm going to take that set screw, put the Loctite. I was able to get that one fully seated and that one fully seated, so I know those two are lined up. Next, I'm just going to double check where the bolts that hold the muffler, or the tip to the muffler, go into position to make sure that those are lined up. These are a little bit off, so one thing I like to do just to make sure everything is lined up is take the bolts that hold the muffler, or the tip to the muffler, and put these in before I put it on the bike, just to get things lined up. So those are now lined up. I'm going to take those bolts, seat those in position. And I like to do this because this way I know everything is lined up, because if it wasn't, one of these bolts would be sticking way out, not going in. You could feel where it was off. So once these ones are in there, I'm going to go ahead and snug down my set screws. That way when I pull these bolts out, I know everything will be tight. Once those are snugged down, back out the bolts. When those are backed out, I'm just going to double check my tightness here. Alright, so now everything's lined up. The torque cone, Z-ring are in place. Next, all we have to do is install this back into the muffler. Again, I'm working on the right hand side. So I'm going to take the tip, logo side up, place that in position, making sure the holes are lined up. The other thing you want to double check too, we've done this before where we get these things all set up, we think we have it all good and ready to go, we go to put it back into the muffler, and then one of our set screws is where our bolt hole goes. So this is just another way to double check, because if you have a set screw in there, you'll just have to back it out and put the stuff in the right position. But once you get that in there, that side is done, you can move in onto the left hand side. The process is going to be the same for our 3.5 inch on the Softails and Sportsters, the 4 inch on the Touring, as well as the 4.5 inch. So one thing you just want to make sure is that you actually use the Loctite, because if you don't, this piece rattles quite a bit and those things will back themselves out. So just make sure you have Loctite and you're putting it on the threads that are actually being engaged. And then other than that, that's all there is to it. It's all just nuts and bolts, but it takes a little bit of time just to get everything lined up. But other than that, thanks for watching, and if you guys like what you see, be sure to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks, guys.